Devesh is, well, I can't use the phrase old friend, but someone who writings, at least I have read with great interest over a fair amount of time, mainly in the areas of higher education, which all of us are intimately interested in, but also his very fascinating work on the Indian diaspora. It's unusual for people to both make large points and to be so empirically grounded and give us huge amounts of data with supporting evidence so that we can question not just the large story, but we can question every small part. And that, I think, is an unusual style of writing on large public issues, which I hope more of us emulate. With that, let me just invite Devesh to start the lecture.
And when we face a problem, we always do this bypass. We will create new commissions, regulators, authorities, most of them which are designed for bureaucrats who are secretaries and about to retire and who are desperate to find a place so that for 5 more years they have these trappings of what a bureaucracy gets. So, I mean, I'll give you, here's an example, right, of some laws we passed, because one of the things we are faced with is the role of the state is it's trying to engage in major socio-economic transformations, and fundamentally you're trying to change society, right? And in these laws, what's interesting is, I mean, just for an example, if you take the Child Marriage Prohibition Act, you had, data shows the 2011 census that 1/6 of all Indian women were married before the age of 18. That's a lot of women who were married before the age of 18. What is the total number of prosecutions? Less than 1,000. Convictions over a decade? Barely above 100. Now this is an excellent example of noble intentions, where one had the chances of being implemented are virtually zero. A policeman can cross someone for walking across a road if there are 5 people walking. When there are 50,000 people walking, that law will not survive. It just won't. You need other mechanisms. And of course, the other mechanisms are much harder, long-term, and require changing social attitudes on child education, on child marriage. And of course, and something if I have time I'll come back to, the fundamental failures of education in our country, which have gone on for more than half a century, that we will not invest in, but we will invest in hugely in these laws, because we think once we passed a law, we've already reached a certain outcome. But of course, as we know now about our sanitation, for 60 years, we did not do those things, but what we did do was to pass an act. And of course, when I looked at the penal provisions of the act and found, has there been a single case of successful prosecution? At least I have not been able to find even one such case, right? Even though there are hundreds of thousands of manual scavengers still, right? So this part that, in a sense, the law has become a substitute in some ways. If you look at, recruitment in state agencies, right? So the fundamental thing is, what is the quality of your bureaucracy? Now, I think, as I pointed out, there's been huge cognitive crowding out consequences, because it's not just that now that you are, recruited on the basis of social representation. What do you do after that? And after that, it seems we stop. So, in principle, right, we should have what we have the gift of acute, selection. Now, in a country of 1.2 billion people, if you believe that good government, data matters for good public policy. Now, I realize that some of you think that's such a delusion that one should not even ask that question. But if one does believe that, you should at least be able to staff your statistics agencies with at least 24 people or 25 people a year. And on average, we barely even manage to do that. Now again, almost all of these, I think, are going back to the failures in higher education or in education more broadly. But actually, if you look across state public service commissions, most of them have been incredibly corrupt for decades. And yet there is virtually no academic study, no intellectual interest, no public policy interest in looking carefully at state public service commissions. If you look at the UPSC exams, virtually no study that are the questions being asked, are they the right questions? So if you want to join the Indian Forest Service, is there any way that they actually know, do you actually love nature? You would think if you want to join the Forest Service, it might be an attribute worth looking at if a person loves nature, or does he really want to join to cut the trees and sell the timber? Right? These are two very different reasons why you may join. There's a study done by someone on an Indian Forest Service probationers in their training, and they asked a simple question: was this your first choice? Not one of the 22 said it's the first choice, right? And this is because they would rather prefer the other F, which is the forest, than the foreign, because the rent seeking in foreign is still a bit less than you can make in forest. Very different from what was there 40 years back. But what happens when people are going into a service where it's really their default value, but not their first choice, right? What is the likely motivation they're likely to have for the type of job that they're going to be doing? Now, I think it's fair to say that 30, 40 years ago, India's economy was not that complex, but I think that has changed. India is a much more complex economy, and no matter which government you see, it's a trickle compared to any other country of India's size, where you see the encouragement of recruiting talent like from outside. But one thing I think is not true: India is not an overstaffed government. Across it, India is on a per capita basis, it's one of the smallest bureaucracies in the world. This is a fundamental fallacy. If anything, India needs to recruit to strengthen its state. It will have to recruit far more people, not less. It is over-bureaucratized, but not overstaffed, right? Public employment, in fact, peaked in 1991. Since then, it's fallen. And by the way, from 1991 to 2011, we added 365 million people more. So on a per capita basis, this has dropped much more sharply. Now, what effectively has happened is that the cuts have been largely at the class 3 and class 4 level, and those jobs have been outsourced to the private sector, and that's the effective basis. Police, India has one of the smallest police forces in the world, by far. One answer might be that, look, on some of these issues, there is so much, but there's just a lack of political consensus, right? Social programs and policies, political parties, disagree, etc., etc. Right? But what about an issue where even when, in principle, there is political consensus, and that is, I take the case of, defense. Every politician, every policymaker, by and large, thinks that national security, they wear it on their sleeve. They really believe in it. You won't find any politician saying, I don't believe in national security. So there is seemingly broad consensus. Basically, we've been looking at aircraft crashes of the Indian Air Force, right? And helicopters. So of the 480 helicopters roughly bought in the last 20 years in service, 190 have crashed. So we lose, in terms of fighter aircraft, we lose a squadron every 2 years, right? You don't need to fight anyone else. We are very good at doing this to ourselves. Now, the fact is that the last 1 year, there's been a huge debates on buying, very mega contracts on new aircraft. But no one has really asked the question, what do you do with what you have, right? Half of the reports, these are all from parliamentary inquiries, half of them show it's technical error, and half of them apparently is pilot error. And pilot error is because for a decade, India basically did not buy any trainer, the advanced jet trainer aircraft, for which pilots have to train. So what happens is, right, that it's one thing to say that you are not, what does it really mean about your actual defense capabilities? But it's quite another to actually, I find what more baffling is just this complete lack of like debate on these things. Massive like debates on buying new things, but virtually no debates on how badly. You know, the cost of these things is very, very high. We are a resource poor country. So we lose effectively between 500 to 1,000 crores every year just on crashes, right? And yet, you know, it's sort of, we've looked at some comparisons with the rest of, with some other countries, UK, even looking at, you know, Russia, which also because much of the equipment, but there's no comparison. We are undoubtedly among the major air forces, by far an outlier in air crashes. Now the reasons obviously are complex, I don't want to simplify that. My question here is why the virtual absence of like debate on something that everyone agrees on, that national defense matters, and for that a strong air force also matters. So one of the other things is if you look at law and order, right? Now, as I said, among the G20 countries, you can see we are way out as an outlier, number of officers. Now, strangely, what's interesting is that it doesn't seem to have had a major impact on violence. India is paradoxical when you compare to other countries on violence. Its murder rate is actually relatively low. I want to emphasize the word relatively. But riots, we are way more relatively speaking, right? When you're not, so the previous one was just total violence. This I have normalized this, that dip which you see, I think that it might be just something with the data. So where you see, if you look at comparison of homicide rates across countries, India is not the lowest, but it surely is much, much less. I mean, countries like South Africa, Brazil are an order of magnitude, greater than India when it comes to murders. But I've not normalized this by riots because they don't report, riots. But India would be the Brazil or South Africa of riots, but not of, murders. So if you think of now, something after you recruit, how do you motivate people? Now the stress always has been on financial benefits, which is the 5th pay commission, the 6th pay commission. But one of the things is virtually no stress on how you build an organizational team. And I think this is an interesting lesson like from the armed forces, right? So there's a lot of work on why people are prepared to die, right? Because in the army, when you join, if you're in the infantry in particular, that is something, how do you, it's one thing to try and motivate a teacher to show up for work. It's quite another thing to motivate a person to die. Because if you go out in the front, your probability, if you are in Siachen or in Kargil, the probability is high. And one of the things that armies all over the world spend a huge time is, of course, that armies, people they know don't fight for their country. They don't even fight like for their, a division. They basically fight for their peers, which is your like platoon. So you spend a huge amount of time in creating that team spirit, right? So if you ask the question, what do we do to create a team spirit in a BDO's office, right? What do they actually do? Now, every company around the world spends massive amounts of resources. These things vary. In Japan and Korea, the manager takes the team out for drinks. It's very male-oriented, so they drink for 5 hours to build for bonding. These techniques vary enormously across countries. But the fact is, the effort to team building hugely matters to build a sense of loyalty and pride in the place that you work. So this means that you need to think much more about training, and you also need to think about exit mechanisms, because we know that in our public bureaucracy, once you enter, either you go out feet first or you go out after you retire, by and large. Performance is irrelevant. And once you've created that incentive for performance, it is one of the most demotivating ways to create an organizational culture of excellence. But I want to spend a little bit of time on something which is a little different, which is the aesthetics of the Indian state, which is the work environment in which you work, right? So this is our normal picture of our police, right? We think our police are brutal, and this is the type of picture you normally see. This is the other actual picture, which we don't see. This is in Calcutta, taken last year, when the supporters of the TMC were attacking a police thana. Now, what we don't realize is in so many of our places, the police really are at the control of politicians. And this is actually as much a part of their story, which we don't think of. We only think of them in this role. We don't think of them at what we have done to something that we think matters for law and order, that this is also what their lives are about. Now, as a motivating factor, right, generally no one wants to get killed, defusing a bomb, right, or injured. But if your strategy of diffusing a bomb is to beat it with a stone, right, it really tells you a lot about what is the type of training and motivation that we are giving to the very people we then give them this massive responsibility of law and order, which we think is the basis of a functional, ordered society, right? I mean, the point here is, I think, something which we should think about. There are a range of people in public service who work hard. And the fact that we treat them often with derision, often we don't put them ourselves in their places on how they have been brutalized by the system and the environments in which they have to work. So when I'm thinking of the aesthetics of the Indian state, here I'm thinking of something very basic, which is public buildings, right? How are they designed? If you ask, have you seen a good study of the PWD? I think the PWD has done more damage for the image of the Indian state than virtually any other organization, right? So if you think of design, construction, maintenance, organization, the ergonomics, the environment in which you work. And I think, I think it's fair to say that a reasonable proxy for the effectiveness of government office is just go to its bathroom. Because you see, if you're not willing to treat, if your own employees are willing to take those dreadful conditions, why do we think they would have empathy for someone who walks into the door, right? So this is an example of how we motivate our public employees, right? I'm not talking here about big things here. What I want to emphasize is small things. The small things which we think are trivial are the things that matter a lot in the environment in which we work. Because we know it matters for us, but we don't think it matters for public employees. And so we have created these environments. Right? So you have a thing where the signage in a public office, where do you go to get what, right? These are very simple things, they're not expensive. So this is not about resources. And I think the point I want to make is that if you don't respect your own workplace, how likely are you to have some pride at work? And any empathy with the people you're supposed to serve. And this is something I realize might seem to many of you as a very simple and basic point. So there's a new thing that has emerged. It's not new, but I think it's become bigger, which is on public investment, the costs of doing nothing, right? I fundamentally believe that the state of the Indian state is going to be a far bigger challenge for India's future than we think. I think that maintaining political order, which is a key function of any state, is going to be actually much harder in the ensuing decades because of the demographic pressures, rapid urbanization, huge mismatches between young people's aspirations, the skills they have, and the opportunities they can avail of. We are also seeing, and this is very good, that traditional societal systems of maintaining order, whether it was the family or the Kap Panchayat or or caste orders are eroding, but they are not being sufficiently replaced or buttressed by alternative systems of public systems of order. And what has also happened is, of course, that political parties, which have been the traditional buffer in democracies between state and societies, have eroded to such an extent that it's very hard to think of any of them really, of that Humpty Dumpty in a sense, being put back together. And if you add in likely long-term effects of climate change, that will only add to these pressures. So what we have now, right, if we think of our universe of the public sector, especially in our higher levels of the bureaucracy, right? So you have a small set that is honest, but it is risk averse and uncreative. You have another set that is competent, effective, and creative. But the intersecting set that is both honest and competent is now actually quite small. I think these are the 5 great transformations the country is undergoing, and is demographic, economic, political, social, and technological. It's very clear, right? I've just put a map of India with states with their relative population of countries, right? And you can see that basically this is what an India is around the world. I can't think of any country that is as centralized as India now. And this, I think, is absolutely true. I mean, China, which is authoritarian, is much more decentralized than India is. Much more so. And we as a democracy run, UP as if it was, which is a single state. But it's really like, Brazil in terms of population. And those countries are all way more decentralized than India. The population pyramid is changing. I mean, think of it in this way. At the time of independence, India's population was 350 million. Between 1991 and 2011, India added 364 million people. It added more people in 20 years than it had added in 10 millennia before independence. That staggering rate of the demographic change is something I don't think so we are grasping at all on the massive implications it's going to have. Because all of these people are making their way into the workforce. This is how the pyramid will become like a beehive, and these will all be part of the labor force. When you add in the projections of urbanization, this labor force will not be decentralized, it will be concentrated in urban areas. Answers, I don't have many, I just have some question marks. One, you could argue, well, things can change because of demand side pressure. And that is how the democracies work, right? And we did see a bit of that last few years. There were scandals, scams in governments. The electorate reacted, there was some change. So one is to say, look, this has been the case in most other democracies. You start off with all sorts of problems, your growth is fast, your systems don't change more slowly. There is a scandal, there are scams, there's a backlash, and there's some change. So it's like going up a ladder, slowly, slowly, slowly. The second is the technology, sort of Aadhaar type that you really can harness the fabulous changes taking place in IT. Your higher education is completely failing, you can have MOOCs. Your primary education is failing, maybe Nandan has Ek Step or, all of these sorts of things. So you can scale up. I leave this as a question mark if you think that is likely to happen. Sometimes there are external, pressures, de facto. There's also, of course, that why should you focus so much on the state? Because after all, the other ways that change happens is the complementarity of the state with markets and civil society. But I want to stress, these are not substitutes, they are complements. And so I'll end with this, which is the irony of the Indian state, right? So the ambition we always have of the state, which is this is going to be the core agent of socio-economic transformation, and we are envisaged in some ways a maximal state. But in the process, the minimal state of a Margaret Thatcher, of a Ronald Reagan, the one that only does the very basics, primary education, public health, water and sanitation, law and order, we haven't even met the requirements of a minimal state in trying to achieve to be a maximum state. And the question which I leave you is, how far can one build on a major structure on the foundation? Thank you.